When a soldier's final journey was treated like a shipping error, one man in uniform stood up and reminded a nation what honor truly means. John was a quiet and serious man. He had served in the military for many years and had seen both the beauty and the pain that came with wearing the uniform. He was not the type to talk too much or show off. He believed in doing his duty with respect and silence. That's why, when he was chosen for a very emotional assignment, he didn't ask any questions. He simply stood tall, put on his polished uniform, and got ready to escort a fallen soldier back home. The name of the young soldier was Private Michael Collins. He was only 22 years old. He had died in a faraway country during a mission. His parents were waiting for him back home, but not in the way they had ever imagined. They were not waiting to hug their son again. They were waiting for his body, for his flag-draped coffin, for the last goodbye. John didn't know Michael personally. He had never spoken to him, never met his family, and didn't even know the full story of how he died. But he felt something powerful, something sacred. He felt that he owed this young man the same honor he would want if it had been him in that coffin. Escorting a fallen soldier wasn't just a job, it was a promise. A promise that the soldier would not make the final journey alone. A promise that someone would be there, dressed in uniform, to salute, to stand, and to show the world that this life had meant something. That morning, John woke up early. He shined his shoes, made sure every medal was perfectly placed on his chest, and checked his documents. The coffin had already been prepared by the military, wrapped in the American flag. It was going to be loaded onto a commercial flight. Task was to travel with it and make sure the journey was handled with the respect it deserved. When he arrived at the airport, he went to the check-in counter. The woman behind the desk looked at his uniform and nodded politely. "Traveling with the remains?" she asked. John nodded, gave her the papers that confirmed everything. She processed his boarding pass, but seemed distracted. No one asked him anything further. No one offered to assist, or even guide him toward the loading area. It was just another routine day for them. John didn't expect special treatment for himself, but he expected respect for the one he was escorting. This wasn't a suitcase. This was a soldier. He tried to ask if he could be present when the casket was loaded into the cargo area, as was custom in most cases. The clerk didn't answer directly. She just told him to wait at the gate and that everything was being handled. He waited patiently, sitting alone, thinking about Michael's parents, wondering what kind of boy he had been. Had he loved sports? Did he have a younger sister? Was he planning to go to college after his service? John didn't know, but his mind filled in the blanks. He imagined Michael smiling, running through fields as a child, laughing with friends, proud when he got his uniform. The weight of this mission pressed heavily on John's heart. As boarding began, John noticed that there was no announcement, no sign of anything special. It was just like every other flight. People were lining up, carrying coffee cups, listening to music, staring at their phones. No one seemed to know that a hero's body was going into the belly of this plane. He walked to the gate agent and softly said, "Ma'am, I would like to be on the tarmac when the casket is loaded. I have permission." She gave him a look like he was bothering her. "Sir, passengers are not allowed out there. We follow procedures," she said sharply. John explained that in military escort cases was a tradition and a sign of respect for the escorting officer to stand by while the coffin was being placed on board. It wasn't about protocol. It was about dignity. She was firm. "I'm sorry, that's not our policy." He clenched his jaw but didn't raise his voice. He stood tall and said, "This is not a regular piece of cargo. This is a fallen soldier." The woman just shrugged and said, "I understand, but I don't make the rules." Then she turned her back and started helping the next person in line. John stood there for a moment, feeling powerless and angry, not for himself, but for Michael. This young man had given everything, and now he was being treated like a package. No moment of silence, no pause. Just throw the casket on board like it was luggage and get on with the schedule. He sat down in his seat near the gate and tried to stay calm. But inside, his heart was heavy. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't asking for a spotlight. All he wanted was a moment, a simple, quiet moment to honor a life that ended too soon. As he waited to board, He noticed that no announcements were made for military personnel. Sometimes airlines did as a courtesy. Nothing. No word about the escort. No mention of the fallen soldier. He wondered if the captain even knew what they were carrying. He boarded the plane, holding his bag tight, his head slightly down. The flight attendant gave him a quick smile but moved on fast. He found his seat and placed his hat gently on his lap. People walked past him, chatting, eating snacks, laughing. They didn't know. And he didn't blame them. But it still hurt. He looked out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the casket being loaded. But he couldn't see anything. He imagined the scene on the tarmac. The ground crew lifting the heavy coffin. The flag gently moving with the wind, and nobody standing by to salute. No moment of silence. Just machines and hands, treating the casket like it was just another container. John closed his eyes for a moment and whispered a silent prayer for Michael and his family. He thought of the mother who would soon see her son for the last time, the father who would struggle to hold back tears as the casket arrived, the small town that would line the roads as the hearse drove by, and he promised himself no matter what, he would speak up. If they wouldn't give the respect now, he would make sure they did later. He wasn't angry for himself. He wasn't looking for revenge, but something inside him had changed. What should have been a moment of deep honor had turned into a rushed, cold routine, and that was something John would not let slide. He looked around at the passengers. Some of them noticed him in uniform and gave him respectful nods. One older man whispered, "Thank you for your service." John nodded quietly, but he didn't speak. His mind was with the boy in the cargo hold, with the silence that never happened, with the honor that was stolen. The flight had not even taken off yet, and already John knew this journey would be more than just miles in the sky. It would be a moment that would stay with him forever. And by the time it ended, he would make sure the world knew what really happened up there. Because sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, and John was ready. Not for himself, but for a brother in arms who could no longer speak. And in that silence, John would be his voice. John sat in his seat on the plane, looking out the window. His mind was heavy with thoughts. He was not just a passenger. He was carrying a deep responsibility. Below him, in the cargo section of the plane, was the flag-covered coffin of Private Michael Collins, a young soldier who had lost his life while serving his country. But no one around John seemed to know. And worse, no one from the airline seemed to care. The disrespect had already started at the airport. When John had asked to be present while the casket was loaded onto the plane, he was told no. The staff acted like his request was just an inconvenience. They spoke to him with cold words, gave no emotion, and didn't even take a moment to show honor to the fallen soldier. And now, inside the plane, things were not any better. John kept looking around. Passengers were chatting, laughing, reading, and watching videos. They had no idea that just a few feet below them was the body of a young man who had given his life for the very freedom they enjoyed. It wasn't their fault, they simply weren't told. But John couldn't stop thinking about how easily people forget. How quickly honor is replaced by schedules, by rules, by company policy. The flight attendants moved around quickly. One of them came by to ask what drink John wanted. Quietly replied, "Just water. Thank you." She nodded without looking him in the eyes and moved on. John sighed. He was used to being invisible when wearing the uniform in civilian places. But this felt different. This felt wrong. He waited a few minutes, then stood up and walked gently to the front of the plane. He waited near the galley where the flight attendants stood, talking among themselves. He cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me," he said. Softly, one of the flight attendants turned toward him, surprised. "Yes, sir. I don't mean to interrupt. Just want to ask for something small. I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. He's on this flight in the cargo hold. I was wondering if we could make a small announcement, maybe a moment of silence before we land. Just something to honor him." The flight attendant gave him a strange look, as if he had asked something difficult. She turned to her coworker, whispered something, then turned back to John. "I'm sorry, but we're not allowed to make those kinds of announcements. It's not in the flight program." John tried to keep his voice calm. I understand, but this is a soldier. He died. In service. His family is waiting on the other side. It would mean a lot to them, and it's the right thing to do. The woman gave a small, polite smile, but her words were cold. I'm really sorry, sir. We have to follow company rules. We'd have to do it for one person. We'd have to do it for others too. John blinked, stunned. Others. He asked, How often do you carry the bodies of fallen soldiers? She didn't answer. I'm not asking for a speech. Just a moment. One sentence. To let people know. To show respect. Sorry. I can't, she said again, then turned to help another passenger. John stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do, then he slowly walked back to his seat. As he sat down, his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from frustration. From sadness, from anger, he closed his eyes. Memories rushed through his mind, funerals he had attended, folded flags being handed to crying mothers. The sound of gun salutes, the silence of families left behind, and now this flight, this cold rejection, felt like a betrayal. John wasn't the kind of man who shouted or caused scenes, but this time, something inside him refused to stay quiet. He took out a notebook from his bag and started writing. He wrote about Michael, about his mission, about what had just happened. He didn't know what he would do with the words later, but he knew they had to be written. As the plane flew high above the clouds, John sat there like a soldier in the wrong battlefield, surrounded by comfort and ignorance, yet carrying the weight of sacrifice in silence. Hours passed. The plane moved through the sky, but inside John's heart, the storm was just beginning. He thought of Michael's parents. What would they say if they knew how their son was being treated? Would they cry more? Would they feel even more pain than they already carried? A young boy sitting across the aisle kept glancing at John. He seemed curious about the uniform. Finally, the boy leaned over and asked, Are you a soldier? John nodded. Yes, I am. Where are you going? The boy asked. John paused, then replied gently, I'm taking another soldier home. The boy looked confused. Where is he? John pointed downward. He's down there in the plane. Died in a war. I'm taking him back to his family. Boy's eyes widened. He looked surprised and then very quiet. Oh, he whispered. He didn't speak again for the rest of the flight. That simple moment reminded John why he was doing this. It reminded him that some people still cared. Even a small child could understand something that adults sometimes forget. As the flight started to descend, the lights dimmed. The crew prepared for landing. There was still no announcement. No words. No silence. John looked out the window and saw the city lights below. Somewhere in that city, Michael's parents were waiting. Maybe standing in the airport right now, holding each other, crying, hoping their son would come home with honor. The plane landed with a small bump. Passengers clapped, some smiled. The usual noise began. Phones turned on. Seatbelts unclicked. Bags pulled from overhead compartments, but John didn't move. He sat still. He waited. The captain never came out to speak. The crew never said a word about the soldier below. The door opened. People rushed out, eager to grab their bags and move on with their lives. John stepped out last. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then he walked slowly through the tunnel, his face calm but his heart burning. At the gate, a man in a suit was waiting. He was from the airline. Mr. John, please come with me. We'll escort you to the cargo area. John followed him without a word. As they reached the edge of the tarmac, he saw the cargo truck waiting. The flag-covered casket was being pulled out. There was no music, no silence, no crowd. Just a few workers, looking bored, going through the motions. John stepped forward and saluted. He stood tall. He held the salute as the casket was lifted and placed on a cart. One of the workers rolled his eyes and muttered something. Say anything, but he heard it. Disgust filled his chest. He felt like yelling, but he didn't. Instead, he whispered, I see you, Michael. I'm still with you. They don't get it, but I do. And then he walked behind the cart, all the way to the area where Michael's family waited. He saw the mother crying, the father holding her tight, the brother standing with a stiff face trying not to show emotion. John stopped in front of them, took off his hat and said, "He's home." The mother broke down. The father's eyes filled with tears. The brother nodded silently. John didn't tell them what happened on the flight. Not yet. He didn't want to spoil this final moment. But deep down, he knew he would tell the world. Not for revenge, not for himself, but for Michael, for every soldier, for every family. And in that silent moment, under the evening sky, with a flag fluttering gently in the wind, John made a promise. He would not let this disrespect be forgotten. He would make sure people remembered. And he would speak for the fallen who could no longer speak for themselves. John stood with the family as the casket was slowly taken off the cart. The silence was heavy. Michael's mother held onto her husband's arm tightly, her face pale, her eyes red. The younger brother tried to stay strong, but his lips were shaking. A few soldiers stood nearby, ready for the formal military ceremony. The flag was smooth over the coffin, moving gently in the soft wind. Everyone there understood the moment's weight. Everyone except the airline staff, who had made the journey so cold and painful as the casket was placed into the waiting hearse. John took a step back and let the family have their moment. He didn't want to interrupt them. He didn't even know if they would want to speak to him. But just as he turned to leave, Michael's father called out, "You're the escort?" he asked in a rough voice. John nodded. "Yes, sir. I was with him the whole way." Michael's father walked over, stood in front of him, and looked him in the eyes. "Did they treat him right?" he asked. That question hit John hard. He didn't know what to say. Didn't want to lie, but he didn't want to hurt them more. He looked down, then slowly shook his head. "I tried," John said quietly, "but the airline didn't let me do what I needed to. I asked for a moment of respect, asked to be there when he was loaded. They said no. Asked for a small announcement. To let people know who was traveling with us, they refused. They treated him like just another box." Michael's mother gasped. The brother's jaw tightened. The father closed his eyes and took a deep breath, clearly trying not to explode. "With anger or pain, you're telling me? They refused to honor him?" Father asked again, voice shaking. "Yes, sir. They wouldn't let me do anything. I was told it wasn't part of their policy." For a few seconds, no one said anything. The silence spoke louder than words. Then Michael's father said, "Tell me everything. Every single thing." So John told them. He described the moment he tried to speak with the gate agent. He shared how he had asked to salute the casket before it was loaded, and how they denied him. He explained the conversation with the flight attendant, how they refused to even say a few words about the fallen soldier on board. He told them about how the passengers didn't even know how the crew never acknowledged what they were carrying. And he described how he stood silently in the plane, feeling like Michael had been forgotten by the very people who should have shown him respect. Michael's mother started crying again. His brother clenched his fists. The father didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at John and said, "We're not going to let them get away with this. This was our son, a soldier, a hero. They don't get to treat him like luggage." John nodded. "That's why I need your permission. I want to tell the world what happened, not just for Michael, but for every soldier who will ever be on a flight like this. People need to understand what honor really means." Father didn't hesitate. "Tell everyone. Tell them all." Later that evening, back at his small motel room, John sat at the edge of his bed with his notebook open. He wrote a long post. On social media, he didn't use big or angry words. He just told the truth. He told the story of the flight, step by step. He described how Michael's body was treated with indifference, how his own requests were denied, and how no moment of silence or announcement was made to let the passengers know they were traveling with a fallen hero. He ended the post with one powerful line: "This is not how we treat our dead." He didn't expect much. He just wanted to put it out there. Maybe a few people would read it. Maybe some veterans would understand. But by the next morning, everything had changed. His phone buzzed with hundreds of messages. The post had been shared thousands of times overnight. Veterans across the country were commenting, thanking him for speaking out. Families of other fallen soldiers were sending messages of love and support. Some even shared similar stories, how they too had faced quiet disrespect when escorting their loved ones home by noon. News reporters were calling him, local TV stations wanted to interview him, national media wanted to talk, military groups issued public statements in support. It was like a flood had opened. John was overwhelmed. He hadn't expected this. But he realized something important. It wasn't about him. It was about Michael. And every other soldier whose final journey should have been treated with the deepest respect. That evening, John sat down with a reporter from a major news channel. They met at a small coffee shop. The reporter asked him to explain everything, and John did. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't shout. He just told the story as it happened, step by step. Just like he had done for Michael's parents. The interview was aired the same night. Across the country, people were watching. Many cried. Many were shocked. Many were furious. Veterans. Groups began organizing online. They demanded the airline make a public apology. Thousands of people wrote emails and letters to the company. Social media exploded with the hashtag Honor Our Fallen. Even people who had never served were moved. They saw something deeply wrong in the story, a lack of basic human decency, a failure of compassion. And then, someone released a short video. It was a bystander's phone recording from the airport, showing John standing beside the coffin with his hand in a long, proud salute. The video was only a few seconds long, but it spoke volumes. His face showed pain, dignity, and strength. The flag on the coffin moved slightly in the wind. Around him, the airport stayed busy, uncaring, unaware. That short clip went viral. Millions watched it. People who had never met Michael or John shared it with tears in their eyes. Celebrities reposted it. Veterans called it the salute that woke the nation. John started getting calls from military bases across the country. Some soldiers said they were proud to wear the uniform because of him. Families of fallen soldiers thanked him for standing up when others stayed silent. Even strangers on the street began recognizing him. But the airline? For a while, they said nothing. John watched as days passed with no real response from the company. Just a short press statement. We are reviewing the matter. That made people angrier. Soon, calls for a boycott began. People refused to fly. With the airline, they demanded justice. They wanted names. They wanted real changes. Veterans groups threatened protests. Then finally, the airline CEO appeared on a live television broadcast. The man looked uncomfortable as he read from a paper. We apologize to the family of Private Michael Collins and to the escorting officer, Mr. John. We regret that our policies cause pain and disrespect. We will review our procedures and ensure proper training for future cases. But there was no emotion in his voice. No real apology. It's just words. John watched the statement quietly. He felt the same coldness in the CEO's face that he had seen in the airline staff. There was no real understanding, no heart. He knew this wasn't over. He hadn't come this far just to hear fake apologies. He contacted the family again. They agreed to do a joint interview. Together they spoke out. Michael's mother, with tears in her eyes, told the world, "My son gave his life for this country. They couldn't give him 2 minutes of respect." That interview broke hearts across the nation. Soon pressure grew too strong to ignore. The airline had no choice. They invited John and the family for a private meeting at their headquarters. They promised to listen. To change, John agreed to go, but not for himself. He went for Michael, for the countless soldiers who had no voice. He carried their stories in his heart, determined to make things right. He walked into that meeting room wearing his full uniform. He was no longer just one man. He was the voice of thousands, and he was ready to make sure the world would never forget what respect truly means. John walked into the airline's head office wearing his full military uniform. His shoes were polished, his medals were shining, and his face was calm but serious. He was not there to fight or to yell. He was there to speak the truth, to make the people sitting behind desks understand something they clearly didn't. Beside him stood Michael's parents. Michael's mother looked tired but determined. His father's face was hard with emotion. They weren't just there for their son, they were there for every soldier who had ever been forgotten on a plane or treated without respect. They were taken into a large meeting room with a long wooden table. Several airline executives were already waiting. Most of them looked nervous. Some tried to smile politely, but their expressions quickly disappeared when they saw how serious John and the family were. The CEO entered last. He was the same man who had read the cold, scripted apology on TV. He wore an expensive suit and tried to shake John's hand. John shook it quickly, but didn't say anything. Then they all sat down. There was a long pause. Finally, the CEO cleared his throat and said, "First of all, we're truly sorry for the way things were handled. We understand now that mistakes were made." John didn't speak at first. He looked at the man for a few seconds, then turned to Michael's father, giving him a silent nod. The father stood up slowly and took a deep breath. "My son gave everything." He said he died far from home, didn't get a second chance, didn't get to grow old, fall in love, have kids, or enjoy his life. And when it was time to bring him home, your company made us feel like his life didn't matter, like he was just cargo. Do you understand what that feels like? The room was quiet. No one spoke. Michael's mother wiped her tears and added, "We didn't want parades or big speeches. We just wanted respect. Just a moment. Just one sentence to let the people on that plane know that our son had died serving his country." John finally stood up. His voice was calm but strong. "I asked for 3 simple things: to be present when the casket was loaded, to salute him, and to have a short announcement made so the passengers would understand that we were carrying someone special." All 3 were refused. One of the executives tried to respond. "It's not our policy to allow passengers on the tarmac." "Safety rules, John," cut him off. "I wasn't just a passenger. I was an escorting officer on a military assignment. There are exceptions for these cases. I've done this before. Many airlines understand and cooperate, but your team refused even to listen." The CEO looked embarrassed. He said, "We now see that our employees were not properly trained for this kind of situation. We are working to change that." John nodded. "Training is good, but it needs to be more than a memo. Your staff needs to understand what it means. To honor the dead, it's not about rules. It's about basic human dignity." Michael's father stepped in again. "You've hurt more than just one family. You've disrespected every person who wears that uniform. Do you know how many families have written to us since this happened? How many people had the same experience? This is not a small issue. It's a national shame." The CEO finally put down his paper. For the first time, he spoke without reading. "You're right. There's no excuse. We failed. And we want to make this right, not just with words, but with action." John looked at him directly. "Then show us. Don't just say it, do something." That meeting changed everything. Airline made several promises right there in that room. They said they would change their policies immediately. From now on, all staff would receive special training on how to handle military escort missions. Every flight carrying the body of a fallen soldier would include a short announcement before landing. Escorts would be allowed to be present during loading and unloading. Gate agents and flight crews would be taught to treat these missions with the highest respect. They also offered a public apology, one that wasn't written by lawyers or read from a script. It was personal. It was real. They invited John and Michael's family to help write it. The next day, a live press conference was held. Cameras filled the room. Reporters asked questions. The airline CEO stood beside John, Michael's parents, and several veterans. This time, the message was clear. "We made a mistake," the CEO said. "A deep and painful one. We disrespected a fallen soldier and his escort. We didn't honor the sacrifice that was made. We are truly sorry, and we promise to never let this happen again." John was then asked to speak. He stepped forward and looked out at the cameras. "This was never about getting attention," he said. "It was about reminding people that behind every uniform is a life, a family, a story. When a soldier dies, they deserve to come home with honor. That honor should not depend on company rules or tight schedules. It should come from the heart." Michael's mother added, "If my son's story changes even one policy, if it brings even one moment of respect to another family, then he has done something powerful even in death." The room was silent. Reporters nodded. Some even wiped away tears. The press conference was broadcast all over the country. People watched from their homes, from offices, from cafes. Social media exploded again, but this time it wasn't with anger, it was with support, with love, with respect. People shared messages like, "Finally, someone stood up. Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael." This is the kind of story that reminds us what really matters. It's veterans organizations thanked the airline for listening, but said the fight wasn't over. They began working with other airlines to ensure the same policies were followed everywhere. This wasn't going to be a one-time fix. It had to become a national standard. In the following weeks, changes started happening fast. Airlines across the country updated their manuals. Special training videos were created. Some airports even set up special escort lanes and spaces for moments of silence. Escort officers were now given better instructions and more support, and people noticed. Soldiers traveling with fallen comrades were finally being treated with the dignity they deserved. Passengers stood in silence during landings. Flight attendants offered gentle words of thanks. Gate agents paused their work to salute, all because one man had refused to stay silent. John received hundreds of letters from strangers. Some were from mothers who had lost sons in war. Some were from young soldiers who said they were proud to wear the uniform again. Some were from civilians who said they had never really thought about what it meant until now. Even school teachers reached out. They said they used John's story to teach their students about respect, duty, and sacrifice. One teacher sent him a bundle of letters from her class. The children had drawn pictures of flags, of planes, and of soldiers saluting. One little girl wrote, "Thank you for taking care of the soldier. You are a hero too." John read every single letter. He cried more than once. Not from sadness, but from hope. He hadn't expected this. He never wanted fame or recognition. He had only wanted to do what was right. But now, something good had come from the pain. Michael's death would never be forgotten. His name would be remembered not just as a soldier who died, but as the reason why things changed. Michael's town also honored him. They organized a special event in the park. A statue was placed in his memory, a young soldier standing tall, looking toward the horizon, with a folded flag in one hand. John was invited to speak at the ceremony. He stood in front of hundreds of people, holding back tears. Michael was just a boy when he signed up. He believed in something bigger than himself. He gave everything. And we nearly let his final journey be forgotten. But we didn't. We stood up. And now, every soldier who comes home will be met with the respect they deserve. That's Michael's legacy. The crowd clapped for a long time. Michael's parents hugged John, crying but smiling. In that moment, under the blue sky and waving flags, John finally felt peace. He had kept his promise. He had spoken for those who could no longer speak, and the world had listened. John knew that his mission was not yet complete. Even after the public apology and policy changes, he understood that true respect required constant effort. It wasn't enough for words to be spoken. Actions had to be taken every day to ensure that fallen soldiers and their families were honored with dignity. This was a promise he carried deeply in his heart. After the ceremony in Michael's hometown, John returned to his daily life. But things were different now. People recognized him on the streets. Veterans shook his hand, thanking him for standing up when no one else would. Families of fallen soldiers reached out to share their own stories. They spoke of similar experiences, times when they felt ignored or forgotten during the hardest moments of their lives. John listened carefully. He realized that the problem was bigger than one airline or one flight. It was a cultural issue, a lack of understanding about what it truly meant to honor those who gave everything. This made John even more determined to keep speaking out. He began traveling to military bases across the country, spoke to soldiers, officers, and families, sharing his story and encouraging them to demand respect and compassion from those who handled their missions. His message was simple but powerful. Every fallen soldier deserves to be treated with the highest honor, no matter where they are or what company is carrying them home. At one base, a young soldier approached John after his talk. The soldier was nervous, but said, "Sir, you gave us hope." Sometimes it feels like we're invisible to the world, but you showed us that standing up matters." John smiled and replied, "We're never invisible if we remember who we are and what we stand for." John also worked with military organizations to create better training programs. They developed videos and guides for airline staff, airport workers, and escort officers. These resources taught about military customs, the importance of respect, and how even small gestures like a moment of silence or a simple salute could make a huge difference for grieving families. His efforts began to catch the attention of lawmakers. Some senators invited him to speak at government hearings about improving how the military and civilian agencies handle fallen soldiers. John spoke with honesty and quiet strength, reminding everyone that behind every policy were real lives and real families. Meanwhile, Michael's family remained close to John. They often met to support each other, sharing memories and stories of Michael. His parents told John that his courage had given them comfort and pride during their darkest days. They thanked him not just for escorting their son, but for becoming a voice for all who couldn't speak. One day, John received a letter from a little girl named Emily. She wrote that her father had been deployed overseas and that she was scared he might not come home. Emily thanked John for teaching people to honor soldiers and promised to remember every one of them. The letter touched John deeply and reminded him why his fight mattered. Over time, John saw real change. Airlines across the nation improved their policies. Flight crews showed more compassion. Escort officers were treated with respect and given the support they needed. Families of fallen soldiers were invited to participate in ceremonies at airports. Small but meaningful moments of silence were observed before flights carrying heroes home. John knew this was only the beginning, but he felt proud. His quiet determination had sparked a movement, a wave of respect that spread far beyond what he imagined. He continued his work, always carrying Michael's memory with him. Years later, George stood at a national military memorial during a ceremony honoring fallen soldiers from all wars. He wore his uniform with pride, surrounded by thousands of people who came to pay their respects. When he looked up at the rows of white headstones and the waving flags, he thought of Michael. He whispered a silent promise once more to never let the sacrifices be forgotten, to never let disrespect take hold again, and to always stand for honor, dignity, and love. And with that, John felt a deep peace. The mission he had started was far from over, but one thing was clear: one man's courage had made a difference. One man's voice had echoed for millions. One soldier's journey home would never be forgotten.